In the south today, they had gathered to protest against Russian occupation by singing Ukrainian songs in the main square at Enerhodar today, and were met with Russian stun grenades. Enerhodar, the site of Europe's biggest nuclear power station, also in Russian hands. The awful secrets of Russia's northern withdrawal continue to emerge. So this is, or maybe this was, Borodyanka, west of the capital. They will have at some point to just demolish much of it and start anew. A street in Bootcha, about 20 miles northwest of Kyiv. Bodies in civilian clothes lie in the road and pavements. A Ukrainian soldier filmed at another location in Bootcha.
They've been killed. You see their hands tied. They're lying with their hands tied.
This photo shows the bodies of 9 men, different location, civilian dress again. Some have their hands tied behind their backs. And there, for now, the facts end. The return to normal life here, another long agonizing phase. Here's one reason why, of many.
They are mining the entire territory, houses, hardware, even the bodies of those killed. There are so many tripwires and other dangers.
Now, the army that doesn't loot the battlefield has yet to exist. The Russian army seemingly no exception. Ukrainian war propaganda making much of children's toys found stashed in an armoured personnel carrier. A BMW marked V for Russian forces, piled high with computing equipment. Ukrainian soldiers have told us several times how glad they are to have British anti-tank missiles. But more. Here, UK defence officials believe a British Starstreak missile shoots down a Russian helicopter in eastern Ukraine. To the south again, where the Red Cross attempts to evacuate civilians from the ruins of Mariupol remain stalled for a week now. Nonetheless, some groups do still manage somehow to get clear and are simply stunned by what's overtaken their lives.
Просто вопрос, за что? Почему? Мы ничего не делали плохого, мы просто жили. А нашу жизнь, нормальную жизнь, спустили в унитаз. Одним таким вот мановением руки. И все. Ни работы, ни сына я не могу найти, которого мы потеряли. Он в другом районе города жил.
She'd walked and walked and had waited for the evacuation bus since Tuesday, sleeping one night in a field. Mykolaiv in the southwest of Ukraine. And when we left here on Wednesday, we knew 9 people had been killed in this Russian cruise missile attack on the regional government headquarters. Today, that figure reached 35. Well, reports tonight that the government in Kyiv will impose a media ban on any journalists visiting this area northwest, from where the Russians have been pushed out, for the next 24 to 48 hours. As we've been hearing, one of the reasons is the potential for there to be booby traps in those areas. No evidence at the moment of that, but it's highly likely that has happened. But the other thing is the potential for war crimes investigation. We should be very careful about leaping to any conclusions. If you've seen that photograph in our package tonight about how those people came to be where they were in the state they were with those men with their arms tied behind their back. But clearly that would be potentially a site which the government would want to preserve for war crimes investigators, photograph it and do all the necessary preliminary forensic examination of that under the instructions from a war crimes investigation, which we know is active in various parts of this country as we speak. Kathy.
Well, Alex, we've heard a lot about Russian censorship. What can you tell us tonight about Ukrainian censorship?
Yes, well, I mean, no great criticism here. In all the wars one covers, you invariably sign up to military censorship rules so you don't give away positions and numbers of deployments and so forth, which could get people killed, and everybody's fair enough with that. Things have been a little more interesting here in Ukraine. In Kyiv, near the centre of the city, a couple of days ago, an important strategic building was hit. That's about as much as I better say about it. But for 2 days, the entire world's media and domestic media here have not been able to say really anything about it or show any detailed footage that has happened. I've never seen that degree of control achieved in any active war that I've ever covered, and it is very effectively done. So it's just to remind people, if you will, that obviously, clearly the Russians have a very cumbersome and clunky censorship regime going very strongly from Moscow outward. We all know about that and have seen a lot of it. But equally, there is some censorship, and we do operate under those restrictions. It's as well to remember that.
Alex, thanks very much. Now, the authorities in Antigua and Barbuda have indicated they're willing to help Britain detain 2 yachts believed to be owned by the sanctioned oligarch Roman Abramovich. Channel 4 News has obtained exclusive footage of the vessels docked in the country's English harbour. But Abramovich is not sanctioned in the Caribbean nation, meaning seizing them could prove complicated. It looks like the perfect place to drop anchor. The Caribbean island of Antigua is, for now, providing a safe haven for luxury yachts linked to a sanctioned Russian oligarch. The 2 yachts, Halo and Gasson, are registered to a firm in the British Virgin Islands, but the beneficial owner is reportedly Roman Abramovich. The UK has targeted him with sanctions and now wants Antigua's help to enforce them.
The official format now is for the UK to submit what's called a mutual legal assistance treaty request. That will pave the way for legal action to be initiated on this end through the court system, and then ultimately I believe the vessels could be seized.
It may not be that simple though, as Abramovich is not sanctioned in Antigua.
The oligarchs have got very deep pockets and very clever accountants and lawyers who have made sure that it's pretty difficult to chase them down, and that's why again, I say, some of us have been saying for a very long time, you need to have a structure in place long before you have a crisis moment such as this.
Abramovich has managed to escape US sanctions, reportedly because of his role as an unofficial peace envoy between Russia and Ukraine.
I suspect, and I have no more than that suspicion, that the fact that he ended up being sanctioned in the UK was one of the things that propelled him into wanting to do a bit more in relation to Ukraine. But I have never yet heard him condemn the war in Ukraine or the war crimes that we're seeing day in, day out.
Russian oligarchs have moved their super yachts across the world to escape sanctions, but several have had their assets frozen.
We have held this ship.
Just days ago, Britain's Transport Secretary posed in front of a vessel detained in Canary Wharf, a £38 million yacht owned by a Russian mobile phone tycoon. And today he prevented the use of another private jet linked to oligarchs.
At the heart of the Caribbean,
Antigua and other Caribbean island states have been vocal in their opposition to Russian aggression. But are they prepared to take some of the wind out of their economy's sails?
We regularly get some of the largest and most lavish vessels here. A lot of those would be owned by Russian oligarchs. Traditionally, our passport sales have gone to Russians. I mean, for sure, they definitely are one of the major players here.
Abramovich has in the past played down his links to Vladimir Putin. He's also denied directly owning the 2 Antigua yachts. Western authorities appear in little doubt. But the azure waters of the Caribbean may not give up their secrets so easily. Well, with me here is Tom Keating, who's a financial crime and security specialist at the Royal United Services Institute. Tom, do you think the UK might face an uphill battle trying to detain these 2 yachts in Antigua, given that Abramovich isn't sanctioned there?
Well, sanctions are easier said than done. So first you have to prove that the assets, in this case the yachts, are actually owned by him. It looks as though that has been achieved. The question now is, of course, what do Antigua do? Because they are in the crosshairs here. They don't have sanctions. It sounds as though they're going to follow US and UK sanctions. So maybe, yes, those assets will be detained in Antigua for the time being.
But do you think oligarchs like Abramovich are slightly protected by the complicated ownership structure of, yachts, houses and so on?
But these individuals tend not to own big, expensive assets like houses and yachts in their own name because they don't want people to know that they own them, precisely because when sanctions come along, and they will have been preparing for this for months, if not years, it makes it very difficult for us to identify what they actually own. So, yes, we can say that Roman Abramovich is sanctioned, but what precisely does that relate to, other than Chelsea Football Club, which, of course, everybody knows very well?
Yeah. And, you know, reportedly, Ukraine asked the US not to sanction him. You know, he's not sanctioned in Antigua, but also not in the US, reportedly because they wanted him to act as this kind of peace envoy. Do you think that might tempt the UK to sort of go a bit easy on his assets as well?
I think it's unlikely the UK will go easy. I mean, the Foreign Secretary has made a very great thing about the number of oligarchs and others that the UK are sanctioning. So I think she will certainly resist any attempt to be light on him. So I think we can expect the UK to go hard. But yes, I mean, the US, in a way, is a bit of an escape valve here. As we see in other situations, obviously, there's a lot of cooperation across the Atlantic on sanctions. And we see some differences in the approaches being taken by different countries. And there are clearly very good reasons for that. And this might be one of them.
And you've been calling for years for sanctions of the sort that we're now seeing. And you've got Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, standing in front of a yacht in Canary Wharf and so on. Is the UK, are you sort of impressed that they are now being quite robust on sanctioning individuals?
So the UK has kind of pursued a policy of benign neglect when it comes to Russian money for 2 decades. Now, they simply couldn't ignore this situation. War on the border of Europe has led to the UK having to act. But let's be very clear, what's happening here is the freezing of assets. We're not seizing them. We're not rolling up illicit finance, which is in the UK. And that's something the government will have to get to grips with once this crisis has abated.
Well, because we can't seize the assets because they still belong to these people.
Absolutely. I mean, these houses and these yachts belong to these individuals. We can't expropriate them. You know, we're not a dictatorship in the UK. So we have to be very careful to make sure that we differentiate between a criminal process where we take the assets of people because they are the proceeds of crime and simply freezing them because we are currently at war. The West is at financial war, at any rate, with Russia.
So what happens to those frozen assets, those yachts, those houses around the world?
We have to look after them. I mean, this is the incredible thing. The asset management of frozen assets is, if you like, a big industry, and they will remain tied up alongside docks. The houses will remain there in Belgravia. And, of course, they can still be occupied. If individuals want to live in them, if individuals want to enter these yachts, they can.
The individuals sanctioned?
Correct. They can. But they can't sail them away. They can't fly their planes away. And, of course, they can't sell the houses and monetize them and take the proceeds.
Although they might already have sold a few of them before. But, I mean, that could get quite costly, couldn't it, maintaining these assets?
It could potentially get very costly. I mean, I think what we see here, this whole saga around yachts, makes one thing very clear, which is it's very easy to sanction individuals. Eventually, it's easy, at any rate, to sanction them. But what happens thereafter is extremely complicated, and I don't think we thought that through.
Do you think the oligarch sanctions are actually hurting Putin?
No, I don't believe that at all. I think the oligarch sanctions are helpful because they put the whole issue of sanctions into the public eye. People know the Chelsea Football Club is subject to sanctions because it's owned by Roman Abramovich. That's helpful from a PR perspective. But it doesn't seem to me that this is going to change Vladimir Putin's calculus.
Tom Keating, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been hearing, there have been renewed efforts to evacuate civilians from the besieged port city of Mariupol in Ukraine. Thousands remain trapped in the city, though hundreds of thousands of people have managed to flee the devastation. Our reporter, Porrick O'Brien, has been speaking to one woman, Valentina, who recounted her and her family's traumatic journey to safety. His report is illustrated by images that have come out of the city since the war began.
On the night of the 3rd of March, Valentina Migotskaya, her husband, and their 10-year-old daughter travelled just 9 miles. 9 miles that felt like forever.
То есть это всю ночь мы в подвале, как бы день-ночь, это все продолжалось, и мы, когда наш ребенок после того, как начинается бомбежка, она начинает кричать: «Я не хочу умирать, пожалуйста, я не хочу умирать», это очень страшно, это.
It was when they saw their daughter stop crying and withdraw inside herself that they decided to drive out of the left bank area of Mariupol in the middle of a gun battle.
Это ужасно, когда она просто сидит в подвале при свечке, рисует, что-то пишет, просто уже почти с нами не разговаривает. Мы смотрели на нее, и ты не знаешь, чем ей помочь, как спасти это все, ты не знаешь, когда прилетит в твой дом.
There were 5 adults and 2 children in the car for that 9-mile journey. 9 miles of this.
С нашей улицы выезжаем, там впереди едут какие-то военные машины, автоматы начинают стрелять. Ну, в общем, это страх ужасный. Дети молятся вместе с нами. Мы всей машиной, мы ехали, мы молились, молили Бога, чтобы только Он нам помог и провел нас с левого берега, потому что, ну, это просто ад. Ты смотришь вокруг, ничего нету, все взорванные машины на дорогах, взорванные дома, где-то что-то горит, ну, люди какие-то идут с сумками, кто-то куда-то бежит.
They first drove to the theatre in the centre of the city, where shelter and information on evacuations was available. 2 weeks on from that night, the theatre itself would be bombed. On the 3rd of March, though, Valentina's family eventually found shelter at a friend's house nearby. A pregnant woman was also hiding out there.
Нашего друга, который тоже с нами находился в этот момент в этом доме, все, его жена была беременная, и у нее уже был срок, как бы ей уже нужно было рожать. Ее отвезли в этот роддом, который потом взорвали. И, слава Богу, с ней было все хорошо, потому что в тот момент, когда кинули бомбу на роддом, она уже лежала, у нее схватки уже были. Она родила в этот день, 9 марта, она родила, ее чудом оттуда вообще была свидетель всего этого ада, который произошел, и на ее глазах как бы.
Valentina, her husband and daughter are now safe in Dnipro. Valentina's mother, though, decided to stay on the left bank with her husband, Valentina's elderly father.
Остались мои родители. Мой папа, он инвалид, он не ходит. Я до сих пор сейчас еще не знаю, где они, что они, живые ли они. У меня нет с ними никакой связи.
Valentina hasn't heard anything from her parents today. Her hope is that they'll make it onto one of the evacuation buses out of Mariupol, will retrace her 9 miles, then keep driving out of hell into safety.